Support for Character Crusade comes from audiobooks.com. Audiobooks make it possible to enjoy a story, learn something new, or find inspiration anytime, anywhere. And with more than 60,000 titles available, audiobooks.com makes it easy and convenient. Simply set up your account and start downloading your favorite books to your mobile device. Right now, you can start with a free 30-day trial and select the book of your choice to get started. Go to book.charactercrusade.com and start listening today.
Greetings, Crusaders. You're listening to Character Crusade Skyrim Roleplay Workshop. I'm Stu, and I'm all alone in the studio tonight. This is the Erinyes Arcana Q&A special. This entire episode is going to be dedicated to all the questions that have come in from fans of the Erinyes Arcana story on YouTube. And, you know, I started out calling it a Let's Play. Technically, that's what it is, but it evolved into a story told in 3 acts and cut short before it was over, unfortunately. There were a lot of unanswered questions. And so this episode is, you know, it's you, the listener, and it's me. It's the CouchWarrior, and I'm here to answer these questions for you. Now, before we get into this, I would like to say a couple of things. This is a disclaimer. Doing a bunch of exposition about what I was planning to do in Act 4 of the story, I've been sort of conflicted about. We all have different ways that we absorb story, but the one thing that we all have in common is that we fill in the holes in our head. We interpret these stories in a way that makes sense to us. We apply the scenarios that we read in a story to the context of our own lives. And so every story, even though we're all reading from the same pages or listening to the same audiobook, the story is different for each one of us. So, with that in mind, I would like to say that what you're going to hear tonight in this podcast is my vision of where I was planning to take the story. This is based on my notes. This is based on my thoughts on these characters, these storylines and scenarios. This is a discussion of the story arc as I planned to see it play out. For those of you who are either thinking of viewing Erinyes Arcana for the first time, or for those of you who are big fans of the story and have created your own mythos in your head for what happens in Act 4, I would encourage you to consider whether or not you want to listen to this entire podcast. It's not that there are spoilers in here, but it's that I don't want my ideas to usurp or change your vision of who Fleet is, who Cimmerian is, and what the story is. So I would ask you to consider well whether or not you want to listen to this, because I'm going to basically lay it all out there. I'm going to basically lay out for you the entire foundation for Act 4 and potentially the end of the epic tale of Fleet Featherstone. So if you've become attached to your own vision of this character and how he rode off into the sunset, you may want to consider whether or not this is the right material for you to listen to. I would certainly hate to destroy any legends that people have created in their own heads for how the story finishes. That being said, I am looking forward to this. There are a lot of things that I had planned for this story. I think, as you'll see as we go through these questions, the ideas that I outlined for Act 4 were fairly grand in their scope, and I think there is some question as to whether I could have actually pulled it all off. It certainly would have been the most complicated act of this story that I had engineered to date, and certainly Act 3 was complicated. So, you have been forewarned. So without further ado, let's get into the questions. Well, let's get right to it. Let's answer some questions. I've tried to group these together so that related questions I can answer sort of all at once. I apologize to anyone whose questions I don't hit specifically enough, but with as many submissions as we had, trying to lump them together into themes seemed like the most efficient way to do this. But, if I'm not hitting it right, feel free to send in another question via the form, and, maybe we can do another one of these in the future, or I could address it, directly on the podcast even. So, anyway, the first question I think I want to address here is, just kind of this general idea of why the switch from Xbox to PC, and how would the experience have been different if I stayed on Xbox? Well, my channel started as an Xbox 360 channel, and I was using an external video capture device, a Hauppauge HD video capture device, to capture video directly from my Xbox and then, dump it onto the PC for editing. It was actually a great system, but I think that once I got down the road of creating Erinyes Arcana, got to that point where I realized that I wanted to do more in terms of storytelling, it became pretty apparent to me that the limitations of the console were not going to be conducive to me telling the kind of story that I wanted to tell. And that was really what sparked the switch from console to PC. I began to bump up against the limitations of the console when it came to detailed storytelling. So in terms of, how would it have been different, I think that, Erinyes Arcana, as told on console exclusively, still would have been a good story. I think it still would have been entertaining, but it very much would have been more of a traditional Let's Play, like you see for most folks on YouTube, just because I would not have had the level of control that I needed to, bring in the sorts of characters that were creating the subplots I wanted. I would not have been able to do a lot of the cutscenes that I created. I think one of the biggest advantages to being on a PC is really just simply access to the console commands, and more specifically, access to the free camera. So, it's very easy to fire up the console on the PC and basically toggle the free camera. And with that tool, I was able to do a lot of the, kind of panning shots and zooming in and out. And I was able to set up scenes exactly like I wanted them and record that footage. I would not have been able to do that on the console. So, the cinematic cutscenes would have been out for the most part. The other thing that I think, is a limiting factor, obviously there's mods and so forth, which gave me, a lot of additional flexibility. But I think in order to really give the story color, I needed to have more control over the NPCs. And by control, I mean I needed to have the ability to make them do what I wanted them to. I needed to be able to outfit them in gear that allowed me to tell the story that I needed to tell. If you look at the story as it is now, those scenes with Sithis, the mysterious figure that is Sithis in those scenes, I would not have been able to produce my own villain or my own gods or anything like that on the console. I would have had to use vanilla characters that everybody was familiar with. I would not have had access to any effects. So I think if it had stayed on Xbox, it would have been entertaining, but it would have been entertaining in a different way, a very different way than what we ended up with at the end of the story, or where I cut the story off. To be honest, it didn't really end. It certainly didn't end like I was hoping to end it. But so that is the long answer to that question. I think it would have been great, but it would have lacked the cinematics and depth of story that I was able to get on PC.
piety is a meaningless and hollow ideal. To all, I am a force to be controlled and manipulated. I am a rudderless tool, guided by the hands of others to further their ends. Men and gods grasping with clawed hands to dominate the Cimmerian. Why did I not see this? Said these very words at our first meeting. What is the place of a priest in a theology based upon gods that do not acknowledge piety or the sacrifices of their most devout?
So the question that I get frequently, many people ask me this. We've gotten this through the web form, and it's also posted probably once a week in the comments on YouTube on various videos, is whether or not I am going to do another Let's Play like I did with Erinyes Arcana. And I would say, right now the answer is no. Just because the amount of time and effort required to put together that kind of story is more than I can handle right now. However, it is not the end of my career as a Let's Player, and those of you who have been paying attention to my channel know that I have recently relaunched Dark Messenger, and the reason that I'm doing Dark Messenger is that it is a location-focused playthrough, which it lends itself more readily to recording in bite-sized pieces, which is more in the realm of what I can handle at this time. So, whereas a Let's Play like Erinyes Arcana is a continuous story, in other words, in episode 10, we pick up where we left off at the end of episode 9. With a Let's Play structure like Dark Messenger, I'm really focused on the character and that character going through a particular location. It's less about telling story and more about having an experience in Skyrim that is specific to a place, and experiencing that place together through that video, through the perspective of Sentrosi, or more specifically a bow-focused or a range attack-focused assassin. What that allows me to do is really start the camera rolling before I go into that dungeon or into that ruin or whatever it is, and cut the scene when it's all over. And the time spent traveling in between those encounters is not recorded. So it gives me the latitude to very, specifically pick and choose the locations that I want to take us through. It does not force me to record every aspect of what it is that I'm doing. So that's the reason that I've decided to do that. It's something that I can carve up into bite-sized chunks. And I think that what most people don't realize is most Let's Players out there, is specifically, not specifically Skyrim, but I think most Let's Players would tell you that if you're going to play purely for enjoyment of the game, you're not going to do that during a Let's Play. When I set up a Let's Play or a playthrough series, a lot of attention is paid to game setup and mods and documenting what I'm doing. It's imperative that I keep a clean game. It's imperative that I keep track of where I'm going and where I've been so that there's consistency in the story. It's really important that I'm keeping track of when I'm hitting record and when I'm stopping the recording. There's a ton of things that distract you from the actual fun and excitement of having, played the game. So if I'm going to sit down and play just purely for my own enjoyment, I am not going to record it. I'm just going to play, and I'm not going to worry about all those details. I think a lot of times when people are submitting questions in our comments and saying, can you please put game footage in the background of your podcast on YouTube, I'm thinking to myself, okay, yeah, that's great, but who's going to record that footage? If I recorded enough footage to put in the background of every one of our podcasts, it would mean that I would be literally recording everything that I do in Skyrim, which pretty much sucks the fun out of it for me. Yeah, it's fun to play and record, but that's because there's a time box around it. The other thing that I think people don't realize is that it's not easy to record this stuff, and it doesn't always work out cleanly. So I may have a good game session going, but the second that I decide to record, I see a huge drop in my frames per second, right? And the experience can change, right? So then I have to go back and I have to optimize and I have to do all kinds of things before I'm even at a point where I'm ready to start recording and do it in a way that I think has, good enough level of quality that I can present it to you and be proud of it, right? So, just some things to think about. I mean, for me, I never say never. I would love it. I would love to see a time when I could launch into another epic Let's Play. And right now, that is not in the cards for me. But one of the things that I have been considering quite strongly is doing another epic style Let's Play when Elder Scrolls 6 comes out. The new version of the game, when we have a new fresh version of the game, probably starting out early on by doing a blind Let's Play that you can all follow along with CouchWarrior channel and go through a blind Let's Play of a brand new game. But then once we get far enough through that everybody has some familiarity with some of the primary quest lines, going through and considering maybe another epic playthrough. So I hope that is a good enough answer for now. What you can look forward to is more Dark Messenger, and that is a series that'll be evolving over time as I start to get more comfortable with it. One thing to remember about Dark Messenger is Dark Messenger was never recorded on PC, so the reboot of Dark Messenger is the first time that Sentrosi has actually been played on PC and not on Xbox. So there's a lot of exploration left there to do as well. And I'm very excited about the direction that, that is going to take me.
He resists control, so too must I, but even as he faces our slave masters in the light, I will execute them in the dark, slitting the black garret of hatred around their necks. They will die upon their own forsaken blades, drowned in the sweet embrace of their own fetid and poisonous wines. It will be dark and glorious work. My brother will save these people, pathetic and undeserving as they are. But I shall punish them. None are innocent. All are corrupt. Sidis will get his souls, but it shall not be for his greater glory. If the innocent die, it will be because they stood between Cimmerian and his darkness.
So this is a frequently asked question. It came up a lot in comments, and it's a question that I've always been very cagey about, and that has to do with Linwe. Is he ever going to kill Linwe? Is he ever going to encounter Linwe? Has he forgotten about Linwe? What about Linwe? Well, I guess my first response would be, how interesting a story would it have been if he had killed Linwe at the end of Act 1? It would not have been. And I think, Linwe always plays a role in the story, but in later acts of the story, it's more of a subconscious role. It's more of a, he plays more this role of causing us to think back and have a distant reminder of where Fleet came from. I think with any character, we have to start by having some kind of baseline, and then over time, the character evolves, and they move from one conflict to the next conflict, and, between these conflicts, we see changes in personality and objectives and all of these things. I think that Fleet's attitude towards Linwe was a constantly evolving one. So at the beginning of the story, you remember, he was very focused on trying to track down Linwe. It was what brought him to Skyrim in the first place. Otherwise, he may not have come there at all. It was this understanding that Linwe was here somewhere. I just have to find him. And so a lot of the things that he did in the early parts of Act 1 were driven by, how can I find Linwe? If I get associated with the Thieves Guild in the underworld, maybe I can, keep my ear to the ground and learn something about his fate or his location. If I get involved with the Dark Brotherhood, that gives me one more avenue to get information about the location of Linwe, right? So the objective of finding Linwe and getting revenge early on in the story was a way that I could guide Fleet toward the quest lines that I wanted to. It made sense for him to get involved with those groups to try to get more intelligence, right, on what was going on and make decisions about what to do next. But in Act 2, as we saw Fleet start to evolve into more of a spiritual person, and we start to see the beginnings of this psychotic break where we see the introduction of the Cimmerian personality, and we see the Cimmerian personality slowly starting to take more and more control. Linwe goes from becoming the focus or the driver to taking a back seat. And now the driver is kind of around the spirituality of Cimmerian and his objectives. And it becomes less about Fleet. We start to see these larger, sort of more abstract objectives being the driver in Act 2, until we get into Act 3, and we really start to see this more of a total transformation into two very distinct personalities, the personality of Fleet and the personality of Cimmerian. And by this time, we begin to understand that Linwe now is a very distant consideration, because Fleet has much bigger fish to fry. He has an entity living inside his body, inside his mind, that is interrupting his ability to live his life the way that he wants to. And as we get further into Act 3, we begin to understand more and more about the entity of Cimmerian, and understand that this is not simply something he could ignore. This is an entity that he has to negotiate with, and he has to fight with for control of the vessel. And so at that point, Linwe is a very, very distant memory. Linwe is the spark that brings Fleet to Skyrim and brings him in to these organizations in the Thieves Guild and the Dark Brotherhood that drive him forward. But Linwe is no longer the focus. Now, the crux of the question here then is, does Fleet ever get to his original goal of killing Linwe? I do not know if Fleet would have ever gotten to the point of killing Linwe, but I can tell you with absolute certainty that Linwe was going to play a role in Act 4. Linwe was going to make an appearance, and he was going to be there in a very real sense. And the plan was that Linwe would start to factor into the story in a more significant way, and we would begin to understand that there was a relationship between Fleet's former friend Linwe and his father Senshin. And we would begin to understand that perhaps Fleet being thrown in prison, being abandoned by Linwe, was not an accident, was not something that Linwe did of his own volition, but was a very carefully orchestrated situation that was orchestrated by Senshin as a way of getting the sort of control he needed over his son. I think one of the things that we've come to realize at the end of Act 3 was that Senshin had a very specific and diabolical plan where his son Fleet was concerned, and that the whole prison experience for Fleet was formative, and it transformed him into something else, something deadlier, but that it was a passage. It was a passage that he went through, and something happened to him in that prison that's not been entirely explained, but that transformed him into the creature that he became in Act 3. This sort of deadly and conflicted and dark killing machine. So I think that my plan was that in Act 4, we were going to have this reveal that there was a relationship between Linwe and Senshin, some kind of a partnership going on in which Linwe was being basically compensated for helping Senshin to get his son Fleet into this kind of, I don't know, this kind of formative space where Senshin could transform him. I think when I think about that whole scenario, one of the things that was on my mind at the time was Linwe fits into this story in more of a significant way. He is not simply an afterthought. He's not simply a distant character who causes this problem at the beginning and then goes away. He would have a much more significant role in the story. And as I thought about Senshin and him trying to transform Fleet into the killing machine he needed him to be, I thought about things like, the origin of Wolverine, or if anybody is familiar with V for Vendetta, when we have these moments where an individual is turned into this creature, which is a representation of their full potential, but in order for that to happen, they have to be broken down to nothing. And so this is kind of how I viewed Fleet in this situation. We have this sort of implied idea that Senshin somehow knows that Fleet has the seed of the Dragonborn inside him, and he knows it at a very early stage, and it sets up the whole scenario for the death of Fleet's mother as she tries to take the child away from Senshin, and Senshin takes possession back, right, of the child. So he understands that he has an individual with potentially limitless power under his control. So the question is, what do we do with this person? This person with limitless potential is useless to Senshin unless he lives up to his full potential. So what I was trying to do is engineer a situation where Senshin basically sees the opportunity to turn Fleet into this very, very powerful tool if he can find a way to break him down first. And Linwe, that character, kind of played a role in setting the stage for Fleet's descent into darkness, if you will. So I always saw, that character as perhaps being paid by Senshin to kind of put together a scenario where Fleet kind of goes down the wrong path. He gets involved with the wrong crowd, and he racks up a lot of really sort of unsavory deeds that sort of spoil his character and make people predisposed not to trust him. And then when the betrayal happens, having Fleet tossed into the prison of his choice is not a problem for Senshin. And once he's captured in this dark place, Senshin is free to manipulate him in sort of magical and dark and covert ways to transform him into what he wanted him to be. And of course, the one thing that Senshin doesn't account for is the fact that he would do such a good job that Fleet would find the capacity to actually escape prison and run off on his own. And that is really, to me, the linchpin of the whole thing. Senshin is trying to transform Fleet into a killing tool that he can control, but what he doesn't anticipate is that Fleet would escape and run to Skyrim in pursuit of Linwe, thinking that Linwe was the problem. And so now we have a scenario where Fleet is chasing the wrong guy, really, technically, and Senshin has lost control of the tool that he plans to use for conquest, and now is forced into a position where he has to go and try to not only find Fleet and regain control of him, but regain control of this individual who has become such a deadly killing machine that anyone he puts up against him is eliminated. So now, not only is he difficult to find, but he's extraordinarily difficult to capture. So that is a very long answer to that question, but as you can see, it illustrates the fact that Linwe was to play a very prominent role all along. Now, whether that resulted in Linwe dying or not, I don't know. There was a part of me that said that, Linwe in this scenario would never die. There would always be something of Linwe out there, but it could have also been used, I think, as a very sort of interesting and shocking way to reveal the full scope of Senshin's treachery. I was always nervous about Linwe. I was always nervous about what would happen to the story if Linwe was killed. If he killed Linwe, would anybody care about the story anymore? And I never really got a chance to test that answer. But that gives you a sense for how he would fit into the story.
You know who I am. Let's not be coy, shall we? It is a waste of our precious time. I'm the one who slit your sister's throat. Shall I paint you a picture?
Why are you doing this? Who is this brother? What are you talking about?
Why, Fleet, of course. The mighty Empyrean. Wielder of swords and high ideals, he's come to save all of Tamriel from itself. Surely you've met him. Perhaps you were not paying attention when His Highness stepped before you. Miraval, I am truly disappointed. Well, I thought you the cunning huntress. How did you miss the signs? I present you your writ and your deed. I suggest you run back to your Valenwood, lest you become further entangled with us.
Tell me what happened on the mountain. How did you do it? Is Elenwen dead?
Everyone is dead, my dear. Everyone.
Everyone, but how?
My brother did not finish the work, but fear not. I'm something of a stickler for detail. As is often the case, it was left to me to clean up the mess, and clean it I did. Thank you for your assistance, Miraval. I could not have done it without you.
But you said it was about documents. Papers implicating the Thalmor.
Did I? Why the crisis of conscience all of a sudden, my dear? Was it not you who took so much delight in the slaughter of an innocent merchant? True, it was not your arrow that took him, but surely you are not pronouncing yourself innocent in the affair. That would be somewhat dishonest, don't you think? Honestly, I cannot divine the origin of the shock I see written on your face.
There was a party, filled with important people, wealthy people.
I assure you, the wealthy burn just as the poor.
By the gods.
Okay, so if you thought the Linwe question, or answer to the Linwe question, was complicated, now we're going to go even deeper. And to kick this one off, I'm going to actually just read a question that was submitted by Connor. Hello, Connor. Connor is from Connecticut, and he asks this question. In terms of what we have seen of Fleet in both the gallery page and the old trailer videos you've released, what is the story behind Fleet's vampirism? Is it actually vampirism? Why did or would he take the dark gift? And how would this affect Cimmerian and his convictions and beliefs on vampires and immortality? That is a good question, and the reason that I said this was complicated is because this question plays directly into the entire story arc for Act 4. Let's start by examining how we finished Act 3. We finished Act 3 with, this obvious conflict now. We have this obvious conflict between Cimmerian and Fleet. And Cimmerian goes dormant. And we have Fleet in sort of a strange, with a strange sense of consideration for Cimmerian. They start referring to each other as brothers. And even Fleet does this. And we start to see a much more distinct separation in their personalities. Now they are talking about each other in a completely different sense. And it feels like we have a more distinct separation of personalities. And one of the things that we talked about at the end of Act 4 were the steps that were taken by Haldir to find a way to separate their personalities in such a way that they were not able to co-opt or read each other's thoughts. And for Haldir, if you remember, I mean, a lot of the stuff that he was attempting to do, all of it was untested and all of it was just theory to him. But the outcome was that what we ended up with was two distinct personalities with their own sets of memories and a complete inability to monitor each other's thoughts and actions. Prior to that, we had a scenario where anything that Fleet was doing or thinking, Cimmerian was privy to. So what that allowed Cimmerian to do was have an inordinate amount of control in trying to influence what Fleet was doing. And now suddenly we find a scenario where we've got two distinct personalities and Cimmerian's completely cut off from control. And the only way that Cimmerian and Fleet can speak to one another is in the embrace, which is a gift given to them by Fleet's mother in that encounter, is the embrace. And Cimmerian learns how to call upon the embrace first. But at the very beginning of Act 4, in the first video I released there, we see that Fleet has acquired the ability to get into the embrace on his own without Cimmerian's assistance. And he can do that at any time. So what we have is this kind of distinct separation of personalities. And the idea for Act 4 was that we were going to start to see what these two individuals living in the same body would each do independently when they had control. And we were going to see encounters between the two of them inside the embrace. But once they were outside the embrace, Cimmerian did not know what Fleet was going to do and couldn't control it, and vice versa. So, at the beginning of Act 4, we understand that Cimmerian has been dormant at the end of Act 3. Fleet has taken some action to help his brother save face as leader of the Dark Brotherhood, being a little bit, confused and not completely understanding where Cimmerian is gone, but just knowing that he's gone. And so going into Act 4, that's where we see Haldir actually perform the Black Sacrament, and he's waiting to see who's going to show up. And who shows up, of course, is Cimmerian. Now, let's also make note of the fact that at the beginning of Act 4 of that story, what I am saying is we have Haldir telling the story, so we're getting the story from Haldir's perspective in kind of a narrative way, and then we're taking jumps back in time to kind of have a reveal about what happened. So, the encounter between Haldir and Cimmerian takes place roughly 2 weeks after the Emperor is killed. And we see kind of a scenario where Fleet is confronting Cimmerian in the embrace and basically telling him, I understand we're separate personalities right now, but I'm telling you, I understand that we both share the same body, and if you do anything to harm my friends, I have no qualms about jumping off a cliff and taking this body away from you. So that is Fleet's way of getting leverage over Cimmerian and kind of putting them on an equal footing. So I was really trying to start Act 4 by putting them on an equal footing and kind of understanding where the power was between them, and then that would sort of set the stage for what each of them would do next. So if we look at their separate personalities, at the beginning of Act 4, we see Fleet. He is kind of sort of a wild, sort of free spirit, focused on battle and camaraderie and friendship, not caring quite so much anymore about things like the rule of law, about order. I considered Fleet to be a chaotic kind of personality, which is kind of ironic when you think about it, because it gets at the essence of what we had come to believe Sithis was all about, that Sithis was all about sowing the seeds of chaos, because in chaos comes creation, right? And we had addressed this several times. So what was important to me was to kind of illustrate how these two were different. So when I think about them in that sense, I think of Fleet as representing chaos and Cimmerian representing order, and Cimmerian representing order in kind of the dark sense. So when I think of Fleet as chaos, basically what I was engineering there is that because Fleet was all about chaos and he was kind of all about, the spoils of war and fighting for the sheer pleasure of it, Fleet was going to embark on the Civil War quest line, and he was going to take sides with the Imperials, and he was going to fight with his mercenary group as free agents working for the Imperials. And so he was starting to assemble his mercenary group, and that mercenary group consisted of, Palandri. We saw Palandri, the Dark Elf, coming back as kind of a spell sword type of a character. And if you'll remember, Palandri played a bit of a role in rescuing Fleet and his comrades after a fairly nasty encounter with the Thalmor at the Shrine of Boethia. So Palandri comes back as a recurring character and joins the Burned Company, which is our mercenary group headed by Fleet Featherstone. We also see the return of Lydia as a full-fledged vampire. I had not, of course, gotten to the point in the story of talking about how she'd be reintroduced to the group, but we saw her return. We saw Haldir coming in as a mage in that group. And then we also saw the introduction of the orc. And the orc was the orc chieftain that he had encountered in Act 3 as he was pursuing some of his missions. I wish I could remember the orc's name. I can't remember it now. But anyways, so we had this kind of tight group that was called the Burned Company, basically a mercenary group. And the way that I'm explaining this, the way I had written the story, is that it was Fleet's decision to take the dark gift of vampirism. And it was after it was after a long period of consideration that Fleet decides to take the dark gift. And he takes that gift for two reasons. One is that he believes that the advantages of the gift of vampirism are going to help him on the battlefield during the Civil War. And then the other is he wants to put a thumb in the eye of Cimmerian. So he does it quite intentionally because he knows that the whole idea of vampirism is something that is, I guess, looked upon negatively by Cimmerian. So this was his way of kind of sticking a thumb in Cimmerian's eye after all the manipulation he suffered at the hands of Cimmerian in Act 3. So he's basically reasserting control and saying, this is my body, this is a decision I'm making, and we are taking this gift because I want it, and I think it's going to be an advantage, and basically screw you. So that is where the vampirism comes from. Now, in terms of actually using the vampire powers and playing those vampire powers, there are some powers that obviously Cimmerian would be forced to use, whether he liked it or not, just because they're passive, sort of innate abilities. But the plan was that we would have seen a lot more use of the vampire powers from Fleet than we would have seen from Cimmerian. Cimmerian would be very conflicted about this. He would hate it, but there's literally nothing that he can do about it, right? He can cure the vampirism, but who's to say that, his brother is not just going to do it all over again? After all, he is traveling now with a vampire in Lydia. So we have this kind of stalemate, right? Where Fleet gets his revenge, albeit sort of a childish form of revenge. He gets his revenge. But that was kind of the idea there. It was really Fleet making a statement and saying, I am going to do this. And Cimmerian being forced to live with the consequences. Now, one of the unforeseen consequences for Fleet was that this would in part be the impetus for what Cimmerian did next. One of the big bombshells that I was planning for the beginning of Act 4 was that Fleet, he decides to discover this idea of vampirism. He decides to pursue the idea of vampirism by contacting the Dawn Guard. He gets involved with the Dawn Guard, and we would see Fleet go through this quest where he basically rescues Serana, he delivers her to Lorkhan, he accepts the gift of the Vampire Lord, becomes the vampire, but then what happens is he inadvertently, I say, draws the vampires back to the Dark Brotherhood sanctuary. And the way that I had set this up is that, Lorkhan sees this individual who just shows up out of nowhere, accepts the gift, obviously has some great power and some things going on, and decides that Fleet is a threat. And so what I had engineered early on in Act 4 was a full-on vampire attack on the Dark Brotherhood Sanctuary in Dawnstar, which basically destroys their ability to use that sanctuary for the Dark Brotherhood anymore, and has the effect of causing Cimmerian to basically declare war on Lord Harkon and the vampires at Volkihar. And this was going to be a tricky thing for me to put together, but I had kind of engineered a way to do this, a way for Fleet to accept the gift of the Vampire Lord, but still declare war on the vampires. And so I was very excited about this aspect. I have several episodes of footage already put together for Act 4, some of which you're watching right now. If you're watching, if you're listening to this podcast on YouTube, you're also seeing lost footage from various pieces I had put together for Act 4. One of those is a fairly epic battle at the Dawnstar Sanctuary between a large number of vampires and the remnants of the Dark Brotherhood. And it really was going to set the stage for what was to come next, and that was a full pursuit by Cimmerian of the Dawnguard DLC, so the Vampire quest line, and a full pursuit of the Civil War quest line by Fleet. And so what we were going to be seeing there was kind of an alternating point of view. And this is why I launched 2 intros. I launched a Cimmerian intro, and I launched a Fleet intro. And depending on which character was primarily in control during that bit of storytelling, that would dictate which intro I would use. So some episodes of Erinyes Arcana would be Cimmerian episodes, and some episodes would be Fleet episodes, and I would use the appropriate intro depending on which one it was. So we were going to see 2 very distinct and very different kinds of experiences. Kind of the savage sort of warlike brutality of Fleet as he fought in the Civil War, and then the dark sort of clandestine and surgical style of guerrilla warfare by Cimmerian against the vampires. And that is kind of what I was setting up. So essentially, Cimmerian was going to take action against the vampires, but the whole thing that set that up was this sort of childish idea that Fleet had to basically stick it to Cimmerian by becoming a vampire, but inadvertently leading the vampires straight to the Dark Brotherhood's lair, which put the Dark Brotherhood at risk once again, and came very close to killing Cimmerian in the process. So that is the scenario that we were looking at going into Act 4. I hope that helps to explain. I know there was a lot of confusion and consternation after all the things that we talked about on Cimmerian's beliefs on vampirism, to see a trailer come out that distinctly showed Fleet turning into a cloud of bats and flying away. That was the whole point, really, to sort of cast some mystery on the whole story and what was coming in Act 4.
Whose name do you invoke in this moment, Miravel? Tell me, which do you think is listening? No one is listening, Miravel. Not the gods, not the spirits of your dead ancestors, not the Dark Princes. There's only the dark, silent void, and this world is but an infinitesimal speck floating in its dark wastes. You and I are nothing. Yes, I returned to finish what my dear brother left unfinished, and I released them all into the void. They do not burn. They are not at peace. They are not in the almighty ecstasy of their God's embrace. That is the greatest lie of all. They have all simply been unmade. Now, another day lapses, and there's much work to be done.
More? What more could there possibly be?
My dear, foolish girl, you are lovely as the sunrise, but oh so blind. I can see why my brother loves you so. The souls of the unmade await me. They await the sweet release of the void. I must not keep them waiting. The Dread Father requires yet another meaningless act of supplication. I would exercise caution with the gods, my dear. Their gluttonous appetite for worship has no bounds. In the end, our souls are all we have that is truly ours. Do not give yours away without first understanding its value.
So a related question on the vampirism was specifically targeted at Lydia. And so now that I'm thinking about it, the orc that I mentioned earlier, who was part of the burned company mercenary group, that is Burguk. That's Burguk. And he's based in the... it's the orc stronghold that's up near Markarth. So Burguk was the other character. There's been a question specifically about Lydia. We saw Lydia transform into a vampire, become this vampire, and then kind of vanish. And the sense was that her disappearance was because she was trying to avoid Fleet, because she had come to understand that Fleet had much disdain for vampires and that it was best if she just made herself scarce, right? Well, we also know that Nephae had made a point of confessing to Fleet what had really happened, that Lydia had been transformed into a vampire and that she had vanished, and that Nephae had taken steps to help her recover from her vampirism to the point where she could escape. And we also know that Valfar was involved in that effort. And then we saw the interaction of those three characters kind of, they all sort of vanished in different ways. Valfar kind of disappeared. Lydia disappeared. Nephae, we were led to believe, was rotting in prison in Windhelm. And that left Fleet and Cimmerian kind of free to pursue some other activities in Solstheim, particularly with the confrontation with our Bosmer assassin, Miravel, and her sister, right? But one of these questions was what was really to come of Lydia? What was the exploration of her character and her return? And in the lost footage, there is a scene between Fleet and Lydia, and what we discover is that Lydia is in hiding, but she has such a profound loyalty to Fleet and loyalty to her responsibility, this responsibility that she feels as Fleet's protector, that she has a desire to not be too far away from him at any given time. And she's essentially taken up residence in a cave underneath the eagle's nest. And Fleet is completely unaware of the fact that she is there until one night he hears noise inside the house, and he goes to explore what's going on, and he finds that somebody was in the house. Somebody has just left the house, and he tracks this individual down underground only to discover that it's Lydia and that she's hiding underground, and they have a confrontation. And during that confrontation, she reveals to Fleet in complete shame that she is a vampire and that she's hiding from him because of her shame for becoming the very thing that he despises most. And that whole situation is resolved by Fleet revealing to her that he too is a vampire. And they have this moment where they're sort of standing face to face, both in vampire lord form, and they have this kind of encounter, and there's a reconciliation and there's an acceptance, and that is kind of where that is the moment where the Burned Company is born. The Burned Company is actually born out of the relationship between Lydia and Fleet, and this is a relationship based on mutual respect, and together we start to see them creating the framework for the group that will become the Burned Company mercenary group. So that is kind of how that was all going to come together. So then the other question that has come up is, what's the deal with Nephae? She actually makes an appearance in one of the intro teasers that I put out, the Sumerian teaser specifically. And the deal with that is that we kind of begin to understand toward the end of Act 3 that she has some animosity toward Fleet. She believes that, she's been kept in the dark. She believes that she's being treated like a child, but on top of all that, we have the reveal through Haldir that Fleet, as a younger man, was directly responsible for the imprisonment of Nephae's father. And this reveal comes through some exposition from Haldir, but also through a flashback where we see a young Breton girl interacting with Fleet as a boy, and the question is, who is this little girl? Well, what we discover through this encounter between Haldir and Nephae is that little girl is Nephae, and that her parents work in the employ of Senshin in the palace, and that Fleet, as a troubled youth, as a person who is going down the wrong path, has kind of engineered a situation where Nephae's father takes the blame for some of the crimes that he's committing. And incidentally, it is also, I believe, in the same flashback that we catch a glimpse of Linwe, and we see Fleet's interaction with Linwe as a young man, and we start to get the sense that Linwe has an inordinate amount of control over Fleet, and is influencing Fleet to do some pretty despicable things. And one of the things that comes from that, of course, is the imprisonment of Nephae's father, who eventually becomes very, very ill and then passes away. And with this reveal, we see kind of a complete break in the relationship between Fleet and Nephae. What we do not see is Fleet's reaction to that, because Fleet is unaware of the break. Haldir is the one through whose eyes we experience the break in this conversation between Haldir and Nephae, as she comes to the realization that it's the man that she's been following for so long that's directly responsible for her father's fall into misery. So, what happens, of course, is that we get the story secondhand from Palandri that she has been thrown in prison in Windhelm, largely due to her own mistakes, but to some degree, these mistakes are enhanced by some of the things that she's been engaged in with or because of Fleet or Cimmerian. So how does that bring us to the point where Nephae comes back into the story? Well, with a complete separation between the two personalities of Fleet and Cimmerian, Cimmerian is at a stage where, in order for him to survive, with the vampires attacking, with the Dark Brotherhood in disarray once again, Cimmerian is forced to start making allies in any way that he can. And one of the objectives for Cimmerian is going to be to go to Windhelm and rescue Nephae from prison. Now, at this point, Cimmerian does not know that Nephae is anything other than happy with him, right? So the idea is that, he's going to go to rescue her, and then at that point discover all of the ill will that she has towards Fleet. And this is a point also at which Cimmerian would be able to exploit the fact that there is a complete separation between himself and Fleet, and he is in a position to turn her against Fleet and step in himself as the father figure and kind of take the place of Fleet and as the father that she's lost, and gain control over her and gain her assistance as an ally. So what we were going to see in Act 4 is a very, very tight relationship between Nephae and Cimmerian. And that was going to be the foil to the very tight relationship that we were seeing between Miravel and Fleet. So we've always kind of seen throughout their interaction that Nephae always kind of wanted her relationship with Fleet to be more. She was interested in a romantic relationship where Fleet viewed their relationship as a brother-sister or kind of mentor-student type of relationship. Well, in order to get what he wants, Cimmerian is definitely prepared to encourage those feelings, those romantic feelings that Nephae has, and would have definitely, I think, capitalized on that to gain her loyalty. So that was kind of what we were setting up, kind of a little bit of a war here also between the two brothers. Even though they were pursuing their own separate conflicts, we were going to see time and time again the conflict between the two. And the supporting characters such as Miravel and Nephae and Lydia and Valfar were going to play a role in that. Now, one question that's come up a lot is what happened to Valfar? Well, obviously, from the very beginning, Valfar was a rabid supporter of the Stormcloaks, and what we do know of Fleet is that he was an Imperial sympathizer. So how does that all play out? Well, we were going to see a very nice and I think exciting subplot starting to form in Act 4, where we have two characters in Fleet and Valfar who had a lot of respect for one another as individuals, but were going to be forced to fight against one another in the Civil War. And you can imagine all of the conflict and, you know, potential interesting subplots that would start to put together. I had only just begun to explore how that would all fit together, but that was the scenario that I was establishing for Act 4 between Valfar and Fleet. So in focusing a bit more on Cimmerian and his objectives, obviously Fleet is putting together his own group. He's going to have a tight group of friends. He's going to have a lot of support. He's going to be out there in the world fighting the Civil War. And we've got Cimmerian, who's largely isolated now. Now that he's his own independent personality, he cannot expect to get any support from Haldir. He can't expect to get support from Lydia. He's essentially been cut off. So gaining Nephae's support is the first step. But what is he to do? He can't exactly wage war against a whole clan of vampires independently. So he has some resources to leverage where the Dark Brotherhood is concerned, but with the attack on the Dark Brotherhood, I've basically taken those resources away from him, because once the attack happens, Nazir and Babette are going to be forced to relocate the entire Dark Brotherhood from the Dawnstar Sanctuary to a hidden location. So Cimmerian's first order of business is finding a way to relocate the Dark Brotherhood to a safe place. And what happens in Act 4 is that Cimmerian acquires a guardian angel. He receives a mysterious note. And this note basically says, I understand you're in dire straits. I'm a friend. I want to meet with you. I think that you and I share some of the same goals. And so he goes to a mysterious underground temple, and he has an encounter with a mysterious individual who turns out to be Sentrosi. Yes, I was going to introduce in Act 4 Sentrosi into the story as a supporting character. Sentrosi the vampire has an encounter with Cimmerian the vampire and says, I share your disdain of the Volkihar clan. They have done me wrong as well. Let us combine forces to fight them together. And Sentrosi brings some things to the table. What he brings to the table is not only his fighting ability, but he has some money and resources. He has access to this underground temple, which he turns over to the Dark Brotherhood so they can set up shop there and resume activity. So he gives them safe haven. And then together, Cimmerian and Sentrosi hatch a plan to wage war against the vampires, the Volkihar clan of vampires. And this whole scenario set the stage for kind of a story I was going to tell about the building of the structure that would be required in order for them to successfully wage war against Lord Harkon and his minions. And this was going to be done through subterfuge, right? So we have a small group pitted against a large group, and the objective, according to the Cimmerian doctrines, is that you have to make your enemy believe that you're larger than you really are. So this is where I had engineered the whole idea of kind of a secretive cult-like group called the Children of Lorkhan. And the Children of Lorkhan were going to be kind of a group formed by Cimmerian and Sentrosi together for the sole purpose of striking fear into the hearts of vampires who would oppose them. And I had, captured some footage. There are screenshots out there too that I can share of Sentrosi and Cimmerian actually working together, and they are dressed in an identical fashion and both wearing matching masks that has really sort of a creepy effect. So the idea was they were going to kind of wage a guerrilla war against Volkihar under the guise of the children of Lorkhan, and really try to frighten their enemy into making mistakes. And that was something that I was extremely excited about. The reveal of pulling Sentrosi into the story was I think major, and having him be a follower that accompanied Cimmerian on his adventures fighting vampires with vampires was extremely exciting. But setting up of the underground sanctuary, or this Dark Brotherhood lair anew, was something that I was extremely excited about as well. And I think that there was a ton of potential there for all kinds of interesting things. And some of the mythos that I created around this idea of the children of Lorkhan, I have continued into the Dark Messenger. That is very much a Sentrosi kind of motif or storyline. So I am continuing this children of Lorkhan idea a little bit into the Dark Messenger. The Dark Messenger Let's Play series, and so we'll see some aspects of this worship of Lorkhan and sort of the ideology that goes around that whole thing. We'll see that come into evidence a little bit in the Dark Messenger playthrough with Sentrosi. So that's kind of all that tied together. So one of the questions that came up was a really interesting one, very simple. Do you think Fleet would have a son? And if so, with who? Wow, that is kind of a mind-blowing question, right? There's part of me that can totally see the Fleet of Act 4 having a child. I can totally see that. But I can see the Cimmerian of Act 4 being completely opposed to it, to the point where if Fleet were to procreate, Cimmerian would potentially eliminate the mother or the baby. I mean, I think it would be that profound a reaction from Cimmerian, and you can only imagine where the story would go from there. Given the stalemate that they kind of had at the beginning of Act 4, it's an interesting idea to consider. But what it brings to mind, though, is even though I hadn't thought specifically about the idea of Fleet having a biological child, one of the things that was really important to me for Act 4 was to emphasize the goodness that was inside Fleet. Although he's a chaotic character, although he's a leader of a mercenary band of, trained killers who are fighting in a bloody civil war, we have all seen examples of Fleet doing really kind of good and wonderful things, enough so that we understand that he has a good heart. And early on in Act 4, I needed to make sure that I was able to illustrate the kind of person that Fleet was. It was important that we understood that this was not a 180-degree turn in personality for Fleet, that he was still the good person he'd always been. He was just kind of growing into his independence. So the way that I did that was I purchased the plot of land that you can get through the Hearthfire DLC, and it's the plot of land Lakeview Manor, which is right near Lake Ilinalta. And in the story, Fleet and his mercenary companions work together to build that entire house as a group, and that house is transformed into an orphanage. And so I used a mod that allows you to adopt multiple children. And so Fleet basically builds the house, he puts someone in charge there, and then I went back to the Honor Hall Orphanage in Riften and took almost all the orphans out of that location and placed them all in Lakeview, in this Lakeview manor or whatever it is. A big part of the story early on in Act 4 was going to be setting the stage to say this is the kind of man he is. He establishes a big orphanage, and he gathers up as many kids as he can afford to and has them there. And I had the place staffed with NPC characters to protect them and teach them. And Haldir was going to be a fixture there as a teacher, as a person who was kind of a guiding force in the children's lives. There was also the sense that, Fleet had gone out of his way to not just build a safe place, a safe home for these children to live in, but to essentially secure that entire valley for the express purpose of creating an idyllic kind of environment for these children to grow up in. The answer to the question is no, I had not considered Fleet having his own biological children, but I had created a fairly sophisticated scenario in which Fleet would essentially adopt most of the orphans in Skyrim and have them living in this beautiful place on the lake with all of their needs cared for, and a good portion of all the money that Fleet made was invested in that effort. And this also gets at the whole idea of Fleet putting his thumb in Cimmerian's eye. In addition to becoming a vampire, one of the things that Fleet does is he takes all of the money that the two of them had earned throughout Act 1, 2, and 3, including the Eye of Falmer, which is worth a lot of money. He cashes it all in, and he uses every single septim of it to finance the building of this orphanage. What that essentially does is it has Cimmerian coming out of his dormant state, kind of bewildered, and discovering all of these crazy things have happened. While I was away, Fleet became a vampire. While I was away, he took all of our money and spent it on an orphanage. It kind of sets up this really terrific storytelling opportunity, right? Where Fleet is just doing all of these things, and Cimmerian is constantly, every time he turns around, there's more consternation as he discovers, not only am I a vampire now, but all the money is gone, and he's led the enemy directly to our doorstep, and now I've lost my sanctuary, and oh my God, it's falling apart, and what is this guy doing? He's going to wreck me. But at the same time, he's inexorably, bound to Fleet. In not just a physical way. I mean, they are bound to the same body or the vessel together. If he kills Fleet, he kills himself. If he pushes Fleet too hard, if he tries to blackmail Fleet by threatening his loved ones, Fleet has demonstrated a willingness to kill himself in order to deny Cimmerian the things that he wants, or to deny him the leverage that he wants to control Fleet. Fleet is basically making the statement that I cannot be controlled by you. And so all of these things that Fleet does are designed to help him take back control of his life and to put himself on equal footing with his brother, who has controlled him for too long. So that's kind of where that whole thing sits. I was very excited about that, and we will actually see aspects of that. We see him building the house in the lost footage. So as the lost footage comes out, you'll be able to see it in this video and maybe subsequent videos where we'll start to see that. And essentially what these are 6 or 7 episodes that I put together that don't have any audio. So they have no audio with them. There's no scripts written. The scripts were in my head, but the audio was not recorded. So what I've decided to do is just publish this stuff as lost footage. I've rendered the videos without the audio, and we'll play them in the background here and in future podcasts, and give you, the viewers, people who are enthusiastic about the Erinyes Arcana story, an opportunity to check them out and decide for yourself what's happening there. You've got my explanation now, but that doesn't mean that I have all the answers. These are just some of my thoughts, and this is stuff that's taken directly from my notes. So I really hope that this has helped. Again, I know that I haven't addressed all the questions. I can't possibly address all the questions, but I hope that this helps. Now, there were a lot of you who also had questions about mods. Mods are a difficult one for me because we cycled through so many mods during the telling of this story that it's difficult for me to know exactly where to start. I will tell you, though, that I am going to be publishing a list here very shortly, and I'll put that list up. I'm going to focus primarily on any mods that had to do with Fleet, Cimmerian, and their appearance. So the way that they looked and the things that I used to capture that look. So you can look forward to that. You can also look forward to I'm releasing a preset, and there will be a link to the preset in the show notes. This is a preset for Fleet. So if you want to make your character look like Fleet, you can do that. You can use the preset by downloading it and using the preset through a mod tool like Race Menu. That will allow you to actually either create a character for yourself or an NPC that looks exactly like Fleet. And with the mod list, you'll be able to also use some of the supporting mods so that if you want to have exactly the same kind of hairstyle, you can get that. If you want to have Fleet complete with the winged serpent tattoo on his cheek, you can get that. All of the armor and weapons will be accounted for there. So by mixing those two things together, you should be able to create something that is very much like the Fleet we've come to know and love through the story. So I hope this helps. This was super enjoyable for me. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to send them in. Use the web form. We are going to keep the Erinyes Arcana questions subject type available in the form so that any future questions you have are certainly open, and I will try to address those on upcoming episodes whenever it's possible. Well, we have reached the end of another chapter, but not the end of the story. This has been wonderful for me. The whole experience of creating this story, of, feeling my way around artistic expression through YouTube, through videos, through writing, has been a wonderful exploration for me and continues to be. And this feels a bit like closure. It is certainly the end of Fleet's story, as I would have told it, but I would certainly invite you to finish Fleet's story however you see fit. And I could not be more grateful and appreciative of all the support I have been given by those of you in the community who've gotten excited about this story. For those of you who are fellow Skyrim fans like me and fans of the Elder Scrolls, you know that I am here to produce the best content I can for this community, and I'm really looking forward to the next chapter, for the continuation of this podcast, for more to come on CouchWarrior TV. I'm excited to be working with my two best friends in the world, and frankly, I'm excited to continue to interact with all of you out there in the community who like what's going on here. I certainly invite your input. I look forward to hearing from you. And so with that, I would like to thank you for taking this journey with me. And until next time, may all that you do be swift, quiet, and deadly. And to all Skyrim assassins, I salute you. Silence is our battle cry.
The time has arrived. All the pieces are in place, the planning complete. These are the moments when I'm able to finally let go the minutiae of my project and drift into the artistry that is to come. The undertaking has been a great work of strategy, but the machinations are finished. This moment is given over to the individual creativity of the assassin. There are things that simply cannot be planned. Perhaps this is something of value I have learned from my dear brother. Inside Castle Dower lies a great unknown, but also a blank canvas waiting for my brushstrokes. I can think of no better way to celebrate the glory of the bloody night to come than by attending the burning of King Olaf. 2 kings died tonight, one burned and another poisoned. Or perhaps I am mistaken, and the one-eyed king is Cimmerian burning in effigy. A mocking tribute to my own death foretold in poetry and flames.